my name's Steve Holland, and I am answering questions about my new book, The Trials of Hank Janson. New edition has just come out, so please rush off to Amazon and buy it. I promised that I would answer some questions, and the latest question is about how I actually did the research for the book. The main source was Stephen Francis, who was the creator of Hank Janson and wrote about 80 of the Hank Janson novels. I corresponded with Steve over a project when I was at school, and carried on talking to him, corresponding with him, because he lived over in Spain. So it was a slow correspondence, and I left school and changed jobs a few times over the years, and wrote an article about Hank Janson for the Book and Magazine Collector in the mid-80s, which I sent over to Steve, and he was very generous and kind about it. And that was published in the Book and Magazine Collector. A few years later, I was given a little bit of a golden handshake. A company I worked for went into liquidation. So I had an opportunity to write a short book. Somebody had said they were interested. This was an American publisher of a magazine called Books Are Everything. And the publisher was RC&L Wanda Holland, who are no relation. So I wrote that, and I sent that to Steve, but unfortunately he had died. I missed him by a couple of months. And his agents, he'd left with his agents an unfinished autobiography called The Obscenity of Hank Janson, which the agents very generously sent to me. So that was, I would have to say that Steve himself was the chief source of information for the book. Some years before, I had borrowed the transcript of the trial of Julius Reiter from his son. And obviously that had a wealth of information, which I've quoted from in the book. Literally, it transcribed, the comments of the prosecution, the comments of the defence, and the comments of the judge, Sir Gerald Dodson, who was the Recorder of London. And reading through that kind of tied in with what I was hearing from Steve Francis, who always insisted that the judge had made Hank Janson guilty rather than found him guilty. And that was an absolutely fascinating document to have in my hands. A lot of the background to the publishers was basically legwork. When I was researching the book, this was before the 1911 and the 1921 census was released. We didn't have the 1939 register. So there were a lot of useful documents that were not available to me. Company's House still existed, so I went up to Company's House and ordered on microfiche what records I could find for various companies. That included companies like Reg Carter's George Turton Limited, for instance. I was able to use the local library microfiche reader and discover some various bits about when he took over the company, when it folded and things like that, which was all quite useful information. In those days, I was travelling up to the British Library quite often. I had a job where I had Friday and Saturday off, and I used to work Sundays. So every Friday, I used to travel up to the British Library. The reading room there was the system was that you would put it in an order for books, and they would take up 3 hours to arrive. So I'd get up there as early as I could, put in my order for the day, and then go down Holborn to Somerset House, where they had the wills and probates, St Catherine's House, which was the births and deaths. I think Alexandra House had the marriages. You could travel across to Company's House to look up company records, although Company's House was not I've always said it didn't actually store records. It was a slow burning fire of old records. I think they kept them for 20 years. So a lot of records, companies like Curtis Warren, all those records had long gone. There were still a few, which I was able to access and successfully, got some information from these companies. Walking down Holborn to Kingsway, where all these buildings were, if you actually turned and walked the other way, you were up Southampton Row. You could go and have a look at the office where Steve Francis had a little storeroom at 104 Southampton Row. Just down the road was where Bernard Kay had his offices. So there was always something interesting to do while you were waiting for the books to arrive at the library. Later on, I went up to the National Archives, where I was able to get hold of records from behind the scenes. So Home Office records, records at the DPP, to find out what they were doing about these gangster novels and how they were reacting to gangster novels. And that was absolutely fascinating. I also read the files on John Francis Wilkinson, who had been accused of murder. And during the court case, Hank Janson's name had come up because there was allegedly a description of a murder in the Hank Janson book that was similar to the way that Wilkinson had murdered someone. That was rather grisly to actually see the copy of the Hank Janson book that he was reading. That was interesting. Yeah, so just a lot of legwork, quite a lot of cost, especially if you wanted photocopies of anything up at the National Archive, because they just charge the earth. Just a lot of correspondence with as many people as you can. I was very fortunate I was researching these books when I did, because some of the people were still alive, and a number of them were willing to talk about their work. So it was a fascinating book to research, and there's still the research was ongoing. Just as I was about to send the book out to the printers, I discovered there's a character called Joe Smith who pops up in the book, and he had disappeared, and I'd had some correspondence and long chats with a chap who was trying to track him down. This would have been back in the early 90s or something like that, and he'd just gone missing. And nobody knew what had happened to him. Anyway, I managed to track down the fact that he had died, and unfortunately only a few years ago. So the research was literally continuing right up to the last minute on the book. And no doubt, there will be new things that crop up over the next few weeks. I think, I wish I'd known this when I put the book out, but that's life. I'll find a way of getting new information out to people.